Hello and welcome to the show. I am doing something completely different today. I'm doing a solo episode. I've had a radio show, I think it was about for 5 years, and I've had this show since, oh my goodness, has it been 7 years or so now? And I don't think I've ever done a solo episode. I usually have guests, but I've been getting a lot of questions from viewers about the content I've been sharing, the interviews I've been doing about digital products. People have asked me about book publishing and different aspects of business. So I thought, why don't I do a little Q&A? I don't have the questions actually written out. I just kind of have a summation of the questions I usually get. And I'm going to answer those questions for you here today. So you get me all to yourself. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but this is what we're doing. We're going to see how it goes. And if we like this style, we'll do a few of them here and there. And if you have questions, you can certainly email them to me and I will answer them on the show in the future. Okay, first and foremost, the question I get asked about the most is about book publishing and becoming an author. All of my life, I have been asked this question. I should say all of my professional life, because there's a lot of people who want to write a book someday, who want to write their story or someone else's story or a fictional story. And the answer I give usually is you just have to start writing, because people say, well, I want to become a writer. I say, well, all you have to do to become a writer is write. There's no other requirement to be a writer. You write and you are a writer. Now, if you want to become an author, that's a completely different thing. You are now in the business of writing books and getting paid for it. And that comes with a different set of responsibilities, particularly marketing. And a lot of writers aren't marketers, but they have to learn how to be if they want anyone to know that they've written a book. So let's go back to the beginning. When I was a kid, I was in Mrs. Scholba's kindergarten class, and I just loved seeing the letters of the alphabet stapled to the wall. I loved the beginning of a school year. I loved having blank paper and freshly sharpened pencils and a brand new box of crayons. I just loved that letters could become words and words became sentences. And as I got older and I could turn those sentences into paragraphs and pages, to this day, I don't type properly because my parents gave me a red plastic typewriter for Christmas when I was 8 years old. And I just learned by hunting and pecking. And I can do it pretty quickly if I'm just writing from what's in my head. If I have to look at something and type, then it takes a very long time. But I tried to take a typing class my junior year in high school, and all the habits were already there. It was a waste of time to try. And I just decided I'm going to stay with how I type, because learning after all those years of doing it wrong was pretty hard to undo those habits. So I grew up and all I wanted to do was become an author. I wanted to write books. That's all I wanted. And I didn't realize that unless you are Stephen King or Brene Brown or Mel Robbins or any of these really successful writers, that it's hard to make a living at writing books. It doesn't mean you don't write a book, because there's a lot of ways to make money outside of the actual book you write. And we'll talk about that. But I wanted to write books. And when I was, let's see, my goal was to have my first published book by the time I was out of high school for 10 years. And I still remember the day that I was rocking my son, Hunter, who was born in March. So April, he was 2 months old. And I got a call from my literary agent that we'd sold my book and it would come out the next year. And that was the 10-year anniversary of being out of high school that May. And so I achieved that goal, which was very exciting. But I really had no idea what was coming. And so here's the thing. There's a couple of ways of going about writing a book and getting published. The first time around, I went the traditional route of getting an agent, which is very hard to do, because if an agent can't sell your work, if they don't think they can sell your work, they're not going to sign you, because that's the only way they make money. So getting an agent is really hard to do. But if you can get an agent, you're more likely to get published, because some publishers don't accept your work unsolicited. And that means they won't accept it if it doesn't come through an agent. And then there's also the option, which wasn't as available back then in 2001 when my first book came out, to go publish it yourself, called indie publishing these days, independent publishing. And now so many people do it. And I've done it. I formed a publishing company for my second book, and my book Big Shoes, which has been shared in this community for many years, since 2011, its release, I did all the things that a publisher would do. I hired a book designer, an editor. I wanted to make sure that when someone held my book in their hands, it looked like it belonged in a bookstore, which it did sell in bookstores as well, but it looked like it was, from a professional publisher like HarperCollins or something. And so I was able to achieve that through years of experience of, going through the process of having my first book published. So there are ways that if you want to write and get published, that you don't have to go the agented route. Now, when I got my agent, what I had done is I'd read a book called The Shortest Distance Between You and a Published Book. And it was by Susan Page. And it was a lot about nonfiction and writing a nonfiction proposal and what's required. It's very different than writing fiction and getting that published. And so I reached out to Susan when I read her book, and she was kind enough to refer me to her agent friend, Carol. Carol turned me down straight away. She said, "You have no following, you have no audience." And that was before social media. She just meant like, you don't speak. You don't have a speaking career yet where you can sell books in the back of the room. You don't have a marketing plan so that you can be out in the media and sharing your story. It was based on my journal I'd kept when I had cancer. So there wasn't, there just wasn't a big market for something like that. And so she said no. And I had some ideas about how I would market it and some things that she told me to do. And she said, go do all of those things and then come back. And so it took me about 4 months to do all of those things. And one of those things was to secure Robert Urich, the actor, the late, great Robert Urich, to write the foreword for my book. He was now a cancer survivor, and I had met him at a conference when I was writing for the newspaper in Houston. I used my press pass. I went and met him, gave his manager like this kind of pitch of, what it would look like if he wrote the foreword for my book. He turned me down twice, and then the third time he said yes. And I still have it hanging right there in my office, where he said on his stationery, "Lisa, send me your book when it's ready. Love, Robert Urich." Still, it's June. I'm looking at it right now. June 18th, 1998 is when he agreed to write the foreword for my book. And it didn't come out till 2001. So this is a long process. So my agent, I called back, not my agent yet. I called back, is about 4 to 6 months later. And I said, "This is Lisa. I did all those things you said for me to do." And she first didn't know who I was. And then she signed me that day because she didn't expect to ever hear from me again. And I had done everything on the list, including securing Robert Urich to write the foreword. And at the time, he was pitching a pilot to have a daytime talk show. So that would have been great for the book. Anyway, so that is what I had to do to get an agent. And she signed me. And then it took so many rejections to get a publisher to say yes. And I used to have her mail me the rejections because I felt like every rejection, every no was getting us closer to a yes. And she hated doing it. And it was before email. So she had to physically mail the rejection letters to me. And it was becoming inefficient. It was a waste of her time to go to the mailbox literally almost every other day and send me these rejection letters. So she said, "I'm just sending them once a week." She was in San Francisco and I lived in Houston at the time. So she just started mailing them once a week. And I'd get these batch rejection letters, but I was okay with it. It is what taught me to be okay with a no. And if you can't handle rejection in the business of becoming an author, then I don't know, you might as well quit right now, because there's a lot of rejection involved, even if you don't go the agented route. So I went ahead and got all the things done that she asked me to do. She sent me all the rejection letters, and then I got a call from her that day when I'm holding Hunter in the rocking chair. And we ended up selling the book to one of the publishers who'd sent us a rejection letter, said it wasn't a good fit for them, but this other publisher might be a good fit. And here's their contact information. And they referred us on. And that's a publisher that said yes. So the whole idea of being okay with rejection and being okay with the no is what got us to the yes. So let me take a break, come back and tell you the rest of the story and how it applies to you and the work that you can do if you do have an interest in becoming a published author. If you have interest in being a writer, which is what I hear a lot too, just start writing. But publishing, there's more to the story. We'll be back in just a moment. Okay, so where I left off in the story is that my agent diligently sent me all the rejection letters, and we finally got a yes from a publisher. And now we're in the business of publishing. Now I have a deadline, which I now call finish lines. But I mean, I was feeling pretty good about this whole achievement and getting this book written. And I wrote the book and it was released, and the agent sent me how it works is the publisher sends her the money and then she sends me the money. I got an advance. It was a pretty nice advance for a very first time author. I was invited to the book expo in Chicago. Hunter, my son, and my late husband, Wesley, we all went together to this book expo. I think Hunter, he wasn't even one years old yet. And I got to meet the other authors that were part of their publishing release that year, that season. And what I learned really quickly is that when you're in the publishing business, you get a lot of attention for about 3 months or less. And I don't know what it's like these days, but back then there's a season that they release books. Mine was one of their big releases, and then they're on to the next. And so it becomes my job to make sure that I am sharing my story wherever I can. So back then I thought I need a publicist. I need a book publicist. And I knew that coming into it with the release of the book. And Wesley's parents, my in-laws, were kind enough to loan us $25,000 to hire a book publicist back then. And I did the math on Google, and that amounts to about $63,047 these days. And they ended up gifting it to us. We paid it back for a while. We always paid them what we could. It didn't matter if we sent them $50, $100, $25. We were always sending them something. And I don't remember how much we paid them off when his mom said, you know what, you're paid in full. And we weren't even close to, I bet we hadn't even paid $1,000 yet. And just our effort of paying her back and the integrity that we showed her. I don't know, I'm getting emotional about this, but it was a beautiful thing. So they wiped clean that debt. And what was really hard about that publishing situation is that the publicist just didn't do a good job. They didn't deliver. The publicity firm did not deliver. And it's really hard to equate what a publicist can get done for you, because you assume that they're pitching you. There's spreadsheets to show where they're pitching. But what I have learned is that anything you're pitching, if you're not pitching yourself, I don't think it's going to be as successful, because nobody cares about your story as much as you do. Nobody wants to impact the world with what you know you can help the world with more than you. So at least starting out, unless you're Brad Pitt or, someone who has a publicist because you're that famous and it's just about making sure you get on the cover of this and on this late night talk show for, the release of your film or whatever it is, then you don't need a publicist. You just need to believe in your story enough to just pick up the phone and start pitching. And this is before emails. And so I just started pitching and I started pitching and I started pitching. And it worked. I ended up on some radio shows and was on local news and on in magazines and things like that. But most of those came from me just picking up the phone and doing it. And what I want to say to you is, if you're someone who's interested in getting a book published or publishing it yourself, is that these days, I think what's important to understand is it is about what you're willing to endure to tell your story. And I say that all the time in my work outside of the show. What are you willing to endure to tell a story? What is your why behind all of this hard work and rejection? If you can't answer that, you're probably not ready. But it doesn't stop you from starting to write. If you have a story to tell, maybe it's just something like, I used to think, I'll just write this story big shoes. I'll write about Wesley's illness and what our family endured that year and the 7 years after he died and what it was like to try to rebuild my life as a widowed single mom and start this business and this pillow that ended up on the Friend show and this marketing and the radio show and these things to hopefully give other women hope when they are found in a crossroads of life that they didn't expect and they're having to rebuild, men and women alike. And so my why was intentional to help others. It also became a necessity for me to earn a living because now I went from the woman who could fail at any venture because my husband Wesley paid the mortgage to being a widowed single mom who was responsible for everything. And what I figured out really quickly is that most people who write books don't make a living from selling books. They make a living from standing on a stage and giving a talk and getting paid money to do that, and then selling some books in the back of the room. They make money by teaching whatever it is they've learned that they can teach others, and that becomes easier and easier in this digital world to create digital courses and digital products. And I'm going to do an episode about that because I get asked about that probably second or third to getting a book published. So it is about taking what you learn and finding a way to earn a living at it. So I took these buckets of passion and I figured out how to get paid for them, because my why, outside of any goal of publishing, any goal with my radio show, the community relations job I did that put me in contact with businesses in this community for me to launch my nonprofit years later, the main thing that I thought about all of the time, and you've heard me talk about my son, he's 26 now, he's grown, but back then, all I wanted to do was figure out how to feed my kid, feed my soul with purposeful work, and be home by 3 o'clock every day when he got home from school. And so that got me through a tremendous amount of rejection in the publishing world. It got me through being unsure of my path. And it got me creative and thinking about, how do I figure out how to make money using words and telling stories? Let me take a break. Be back in just a moment. Okay, so I've been talking about just my journey to getting publishing and how does this apply to you? So if you are someone who wants to tell a story, you could write your story and keep it in a drawer or get it bound and printed for your family, for the story that you want to share. And that was something I was saying earlier, last segment, that I didn't get to, that I considered just writing the story so our son would have it and know the history of our family and how hard we fought for his dad's life. And then I thought, well, who else can be helped by this story? And how can I help impact my little corner of the world and help them learn some things without having to go through those things? And so for me, it made sense to get a book published, and it became Big Shoes. That's the title of the book. And through that process, I decided I was not going to go the agented route this time. I was going to form my own publishing company, and that's what I did. And as I said, I hired a book designer, did all the things. If you hold Big Shoes in your hands, it looks, feels, and reads like it's published by one of the big publishers. That was the goal. I'm writing my third book now, also nonfiction, and I will go the same route. I will publish it myself. I will market it myself. I will do all of those things. So this is to say, the agented route is not the wrong way. I have a friend right now who's determined and doing really well with getting traction with agents. And that's a great way to go. But if you want to do it yourself, there are so many ways. If you have a story inside of you and a great big why for telling it, you can get that story out. You can share it in this little corner of the world, in this community where we live here, wherever you live and you're watching this. You can go to many different resources. I use AI to research. You can also research with other platforms to find out where you'd go to, what's the best way to go about self-publishing these days. You can do it in digital form so it never goes to print. You can do it in print on demand so that it's printed and is shipped, and you don't have any investment in terms of having books published and printed that you keep in your garage and take with you to book signings. There's a whole other segment we could do about marketing books, because I did the whole back of the room I do that, signing it at keynotes and things I give. But also a way that I went was, you do book signings in bookstores and libraries, and it just seems kind of quiet and uncomfortable. Like, people don't want to ask their questions because they're in line and it's very quiet, and they want the next person to be able to get in line, get their book too. And so instead, with my second book, I Les Schwab wrapped my car, and I traveled from here to LA, from Washington to LA, and I sold books along the way. And I had big book signings at wine bars and communities where my friends invited their friends. And I did local television shows like in Sacramento, Good Morning Sacramento, or whatever it was. And then people came to the event because of it. So you just have to get really creative in how you market it. But you're going to have to get really creative in how you market it, whether you get an agent and a publisher or you publish it yourself, because the support for a book from someone, especially a first-time publisher, what you're going to get from your publishing house is not going to be enough to get the traction you need for the long-term sale of your book. I just sold a couple of books last month. The book came out in 2011. I'll always sell that book. It's a big part of my heart. But where I make the most money isn't from book sales. It's from standing on a stage, telling my story, giving a keynote at a conference that has 1,000 people or 500 people, whatever the case, getting paid to do that, and then getting to sell books at the back of the room. So I just think it's important to understand, and also just want to mention that Big Shoes is actually owned by, or the rights are held by, the Don't Wait Project, my nonprofit. And so the book proceeds go to the Don't Wait Project. So I literally don't get paid for sales of the book unless I'm on a stage talking, and I get paid for that and then sell books, and then that money goes to the Don't Wait Project. So there's all kinds of ways for you to tell your story. I didn't know if I could get through 22 minutes and 50 seconds all by myself, but I did. And I would love to hear back from you if you liked this version of the show. What other things you might want me to share with you that could be of value to the things that you want to do. If you have an entrepreneur heart, you have a story you want to tell, and you need creative ways to tell it, send me a message, send me an email, and I will answer your questions on this show if that's how you would like me to do it going forward. Of course, I'll continue to have guests, but this has been a really good time to sit and chat with you, this audience that's been so loyal for so long. Thank you for joining me. Have a wonderful rest of your day.